Hey everybody. So this is just some thoughts on the video made by a licensed psychologist in America called Dr. G. I'm going to refer to him for the remainder of this video as just G. So first of all, I'm just going to list 3 of the main errors that I believe G made. And the first one is that he failed to establish a baseline for Zach. And without a baseline, any analysis is going to be unreliable and lack validity. The second point, which is divided into 2 parts, is that G failed to take into consideration the effects of the extreme context and conditions that Zach has been living under for the last 2 to 3 years. Conditions which the vast majority of human beings will never experience in their lifetime. G failed to acknowledge or show any psychological understanding of the effects being incarcerated and isolated from loved ones will have on a person. He failed to acknowledge or show any psychological understanding of the effects on a person of being in prison clothes, in chains, and in front of a judge who has complete power to decide sentence length. He failed to notice or acknowledge that Zach was choosing his words very carefully and that he was not free to say what he wanted to due to restraints imposed by advice from his attorneys, and also knowing that if he said something that upset the judge in any way, he could end up with a much more severe sentence. The second part of number 2 that G failed was that he failed to acknowledge or show any psychological understanding for the fact that Zach has had nearly 3 years to think about and rehearse what he might say, and therefore neither Zach's speech nor his presentation of that speech will have been spontaneous, but carefully thought out. Speeches that have been rehearsed and where the person is not free to express themselves openly and without censure cannot be analysed in the usual way. Failing to acknowledge these contextual factors makes G's analysis, in my opinion, doubly invalid. And the last point, number 3, that's just as important as the other 2, perhaps more so, is that G did not do any research about the case. He just unquestioningly believed the state's version of events, which anyone who has studied the case will know is a fabrication, as there is no evidence whatsoever that Zach committed any of the crimes that he was accused of. So in addition to the 3 points that we've discussed that, in my opinion, invalidate pretty much everything that G says, I want to go on to discuss some of the specific accusations that G makes. So the first one is he accuses Zach of trying to appear happy, as if trying to appear happy is in some way a negative. And I would assume the exact opposite to G's assumption, in that it shows that Zach is actually a very sensitive human being, and that in trying to appear happy, if that is indeed what he's doing, is he's being sensitive to the needs of his family and friends who are either in court or he is aware will be watching, and he wants to conceal for their benefit how he might really be feeling on the inside. And so I would interpret trying to appear happy as the equivalent of putting on a brave face. And it's what functional and emotionally competent human beings do as a way to protect their loved ones, perhaps from some harsher truths, and also to maintain some semblance of self-esteem for themselves when they're in these absolutely extreme circumstances. As I said before, the vast majority of us will never, ever be in this situation that Zach has found himself in. And not only that, the vast majority of us will never have a family member either who is in these extreme circumstances. So the next point that I just want to mention is G's accusation that Zach is a psychopath. And this happens, believe it or not, within less than 90 seconds of G's video. G is accusing Zach of being a psychopath. And he's further accusing Zach of being a type of psychopath who is manipulative, superficially charming, and charismatic. Well, firstly, these are not criteria on their own for being any type of psychopath. Secondly, what evidence is provided by G to justify him giving the label of psychopath to Zach? Answer, none. The other thing to remember is that every single human being alive is practiced in the art of influencing or manipulating, however you want to describe it. But we're all practiced in the art of influencing other people and situations, at least to some degree, as we try to navigate the world and get our own needs met. Being able to influence or manipulate to some level is part of being a functional human being. I mean, there does come a point where the level of manipulation exceeds what would be deemed functional and healthy, especially when the manipulation is at the expense of other people or for other harmful purposes. So G has provided no evidence to back up his claims that Zach shows a psychopathological degree of manipulation of others. And exactly the same can be said for the accusations of Zach being superficially charming and charismatic. These are characteristics that almost every human being has to some degree, and it's a sign of being socially competent when someone is able to be charming and has some charisma. Whether it's superficial or not is a judgment that a stranger simply is not qualified to make, no matter what that person's profession or qualifications. G is not qualified to make the assessment that Zach is any kind of psychopath, and he's not qualified to make a determination whether he is superficially charming or genuinely charming. It's just a nonsense. You know, the other thing to remember is that people without any charm or charisma will often struggle to form and maintain relationships in their families, socially with friends, and in the workplace. And they often find themselves isolated, alone, and with very poor mental health. Now, we have evidence that indicates without doubt that Zach has very good social skills. He has numerous family members who love him dearly. He has numerous friends and acquaintances who have knowledge of him over many, many years, who love him dearly. So I would propose that it is egregiously outside the scope of competence for G to attempt to label Zach at all, let alone as a psychopath. G goes on to discuss in a little bit more detail the sort of specific characteristics of the type of psychopath that he's diagnosed Zach as being. So he lists the characteristics of nonchalance, being calm and composed, showing a lack of emotion, and that he may come across as disinterested / bored. So none of these behaviours can in any way be taken as indicating psychopathology or that someone is a psychopath. This is simply, in my opinion, G projecting his own self-objects and subjective beliefs onto Zach. This is also an example, in my opinion, of G ascribing to himself mind-reading capabilities that no human being has. G does not have sufficient knowledge of Zach to make any of these observations reliable. So all we get from G's observations are a reflection of who G is. And they tell us nothing about Zach at all, in my view. I personally would make the observation that Zach, being able to remain calm and composed under what must have been immense emotional duress, not just for the time that he was in court, but for the whole preceding almost 3 years, that this indicates that he has good social and emotional intelligence and above average levels of self-control. And that is a good thing. That shows he's a competent human being. It's especially important to people who have genuine feelings of care and love for others, that they shield family members from knowing just how upset they are when those family members and friends are going to have very little opportunity to offer any comfort. That we know that Zach will have been aware that his family and friends were watching. And my assumption is that Zach was very mindful of their feelings. And he will have known that they would not have wanted to see Zach falling apart, even if that is how Zach might have felt on the inside. My observations would be that Zach showed significant empathy and appropriate emotional responsiveness towards others and what was happening in court during the sentencing, but actually also throughout the trial. And this observation is supported, I believe, from reviewing the multiple public comments made by his family and friends. And I would offer it as irrefutable evidence that Zach is not a psychopath. The other characteristics that G mentions specifically is manipulative charm, which we've already dealt with, and a willingness to breach boundaries. So as discussed, I interpret this as another invalid observation, as there is no evidence provided by G that Zach's reactions are anything other than within functional and normal limits of human behaviour. Additionally, I believe that G infantilizes the people he is accusing Zach of nefariously manipulating and breaching boundaries with, predominantly his female lawyer. G is implying that she is too stupid to realise if someone is trying to manipulate her or intrude on her boundaries, and that she is too helpless and enfeebled to defend herself and to continue to behave professionally. Not only is this sexist and belittling towards Zach's attorney, In my opinion, G again shows no psychological understanding of human nature, nor of professional relationships, and instead seems to just vastly underestimate and denigrate others, specifically Zach's attorney, the female attorney. So that brings us on nicely to the specific accusation that G makes, where he accuses Zach of being a narcissist, and that he accuses Zach of probably believing he's the smartest guy in the room and that he, Zach, will outwit everyone else. And G also specifically accuses Zach of calculating how he wants to appeal the case. So again, G provides no evidence for these observations. He cannot read Zach's mind, nor anyone else's mind. So in my opinion, this is just more of G's self-objects that he is projecting out of himself and onto his target for denigration, which in this case is Zach. As for his specific accusation that Zach is calculating how to appeal his case, where G uses the word calculating to imply some perverse and devious intent, the reality is that Zach and his lawyers will have been exploring together reasons to appeal since the verdict, if not before. And this is entirely normal and functional behaviour. So the next accusation that we look at from G is a lack of genuine remorse. So G observed that Zach showed a lack of genuine remorse. So anybody who has done even the tiniest bit of research into the case will understand the glaring mistake made in this observation, which is that Zach cannot be remorseful for something he did not do. So that G did not even mention the possibility that Zach is not showing remorse because he has done nothing to feel remorseful about, is a gross omission and is indicative, in my opinion, of G's dysfunction and his biased, lazy and distorted thought processes. So we go on to another accusation by G, is that of disrespect. G said that because of Zach's facial expressions, he was being disrespectful. And this is a sign that Zach's a psychopath. Really? Being disrespectful towards other human beings cannot in any way be taken as a sign or symptom of being a psychopath. If it were, then every human being on the planet almost is a psychopath, because all of us, almost without exception, from time to time, will pull faces or roll our eyes or are flippant or rude to others. So including this element of disrespect as a sign of being a psychopath is, to my mind, just grasping at straws on the part of G, just a sign of sheer desperation. And it proves to me that G has nothing of value to support any of his accusations. Another specific accusation that G makes is that of being calculating. He accuses Zach of paying attention to other people's reactions and thinking about his next move. Sorry. So, he's just described as a functional human being. That's what we do. We pay attention to other people. We listen to other people if we're functional. And we modify our behaviour in response to what we see and hear from other people. This is entirely normal behavior. Again, G is using pejorative words like calculate, in my opinion, just to try and manipulate other people and to imply devious intent, because G needs to persuade others away from the reality that Zach is just a normal guy. In my opinion, Zach behaved like a well-adjusted and sensitive human being, coping admirably with extraordinarily adverse circumstances. None of us know how we would behave in the situation that Zach was in. In relation to Zach's attorney, G accuses Zach of doing several things that indicate an inappropriate relationship existed. So the first thing he accuses Zach of is looking at his attorney manipulatively. So what evidence does G give to support his assertion that a look can be manipulative? Answer: none. What explanation does G give for how to tell the difference between a manipulative look and a non-manipulative look? Answer: none. So yet again, all this is G projecting his prejudice and, in my opinion, his own dysfunction onto Zach. The next thing G accuses Zach of is looking at his female attorney's chest. Looking at an out of the ordinary physical feature another person has is something that we all do. It's unavoidable and entirely functional and normal behavior when someone has a feature about them that is eye-catching in some way that other people will notice. And to notice, we have to look. I would estimate that there were approximately 0 people who did not notice Nicole's chest. So for G to imply that somehow looking makes Zach guilty of having an inappropriate relationship with his attorney, I just think it's completely farcical. G returns to accusing Zach of trying to act nonchalant and cool. Again, he doesn't provide any evidence to support this assertion, just an implication that this behavior, how Zach was behaving in an emotionally controlled and self-contained way, was somehow nefarious and negative. The last point I'm going to mention is the accusation that Zach is being inappropriately flirtatious and seductive towards his female attorney. And again, this to me just seems like more projection and assertions made with no supporting evidence whatsoever. And it's G failing to see the benign nature of the interactions between Zach and his attorney. This tells us nothing about Zach, in my opinion, but everything about G. So let's think about what would G's motivation be for making these baseless assertions about what seemed to me anyway to be just benign behavior, a relationship that was positive between Zach and his attorney. This is a good thing. If you can develop a positive relationship with your attorney, it shows social competence. But G has to cast it in a negative light as being inappropriately flirtatious. He sexualizes the relationship and accuses Zach of trying to seduce his female attorney. If G actually believes that Zach was being inappropriately flirtatious and seductive, then in my opinion, this is G projecting and demonstrating his own inner dysfunction by attributing malignant intent to other people's benign behavior with no evidence or justification whatsoever. In conclusion, my opinion is there is nothing of value in any of the points that G tried to make. On the contrary, all he showed was that he has a strong need to persuade, to manipulate, and control what other people think. It's all his stuff, his own self-objects that come from within him, and they belong to G, and they are nothing to do with Zach.